Here we have some components from various stages of the integrated circuit manufacturing process. The process starts with a wafer of silicon. This is actually cut from a long cylindrical crystal of silicon, which is grown from a crystal, and it's cut into very thin pieces called wafers. The integrated circuit pattern is chemically etched and deposited onto the silicon surface through doping of chemicals. Here's a close-up of a wafer that's already been processed. Each of the squares represents a different integrated circuit or a chip, and you can see a pattern, although the detail is very small, way too small to see except at extreme magnification. Once the wafer has been processed, an adhesive material is placed on the back, and then a very sharp saw is used to cut the individual chips out of the wafer, and the adhesive holds them all together. But at this point, each chip is separate and can be peeled off of the adhesive. After cutting, the chips are inspected with a microscope visually by a person, and obvious defects are detected, and the chips with defects are marked, and only the good chips are removed for the follow-on process. The next step is to glue the silicon chip down onto a metal framework here that allows us to make connections to electrical points on the silicon. And this is a very thin sheet metal that's stamped out. Here's a close-up of the metal gridwork that surrounds the chip. And the next step is to make connections between the chip and this gridwork. You can see the gridwork is very fine metal slats and metal conductors that radiate outwards that allow us to access pins that are large enough to attach to with wires or with soldering. The connections between the chip and the metal framework are usually made with gold wire. Gold has very high conductivity. And as you can see, it's very fine wire. And so it's a very challenging task to weld this from the silicon to the metal framework. But that's done by a robot and very accurately and without breaking the wire. Here's a close-up of a chip where all of the connections have been made between the silicon and the surrounding metal conductors, and here are the eventual pins sticking out. It's kind of hard to see, but all of the gold wires have been soldered or welded in place by a robot. One of the last stages in the process is to encase the silicon chip in an epoxy or plastic material that protects the chip and all of the connections, and also gives it a standard dimension or size that can be used in applications. Finally, the last step is to cut the final integrated circuits out of the metal framework. And now we have the individual packages that can be labeled and then tested electrically.